In the autumn of 1915, Otto Dix pulls the trigger of his machine gun against the first line of soldiers trying to overtake his trench, amidst the noise of gunfire, screams, and the groans of men falling into the mud and barbed wire. He is 24 years old, and not long ago, he was a young painter in Dresden who, like thousands of his compatriots, was mobilized at the onset of war. In his backpack, a book by Nietzsche shares space with the Bible and a sketchbook that he carries everywhere. He hasn't lost the habit of drawing in his spare moments, but now his portraits of everyday life have been replaced by the weary faces of his comrades and the horror etched into the lost gazes of those who have spent months on the front lines. In a letter to his family, he writes, "War is so terrible, so enormous. One must have seen man in this unbridled state to know something about humanity. War is simply bestial." Otto Dix grew up in a working-class family in Gera, Germany, where his early steps in art were marked by a mix of passion and pragmatism. His mother, a woman with a deep appreciation for music and the arts, was his greatest supporter. She managed to convince his father, an industrial worker, to allow Otto to study painting, but under one condition: Otto had to learn a practical trade. Otto began painting decorations for buildings and facades, a skill that ensured an income in case he couldn't make a living as an artist. However, from a very young age, Dix was convinced that his destiny lay elsewhere. In 1909, Dix earned a scholarship to study at the prestigious Dresden Academy of Fine Arts. There, he honed his technique, but also began to question the artistic conventions of his time. His fascination with emerging movements like Futurism, Dadaism, and metaphysical painting led him to explore darker themes, distancing himself from tradition and delving into symbolism and experimentation. The most transformative experience came with World War I. Mobilized as a gunner, Otto experienced the conflict firsthand. On the front lines, he always carried a sketchbook. Desolate landscapes, the hollow stares of soldiers, and shattered bodies began to fill his drawings. Years later, reflecting on the conflict, Dix declared that it was necessary to show war as it truly was: brutal, dehumanizing, and bestial. Dix survived the conflict, but the physical and emotional scars stayed with him for the rest of his life. The war had profoundly transformed his view of art and humanity. In 1924, Dix poured these memories into a series of etchings titled The War. Comprising 50 plates, this series is a harrowing testament to his experience on the front. Using the etching technique, each plate depicts scenes of trenches, decomposing bodies, mutilations, and the existential void of soldiers. These drawings are often compared to Goya's etchings in The Disasters of War. In this series, Dix sought to represent the raw reality of the conflict without embellishment, but it was also a deeply personal mea culpa. As a gunner, Dix had not only witnessed the horror, but had been a participant in it. His etchings were not just a denunciation, but an act of memory. After its defeat in World War I, Germany was left devastated. The country faced an unprecedented socioeconomic collapse, mass unemployment, political extremism on both ends of the spectrum, and inflation that seemed endless. In this context, Otto Dix became an unflinching observer of his time. Through his paintings, he captured the moral and physical decay of a society scarred by the consequences of war. Wounded veterans, sex workers, and satirical depictions of the intellectual elite were recurring symbols in his work, reflecting a fractured and unequal world. By the mid-1920s, the German economy began to stabilize thanks to loans from the United States. It was at this time that the Weimar Republic experienced what is known as its golden years. However, even as the economy revived and cities flourished, the gap between the rich and the poor continued to grow. During this period, Berlin became the epicenter of a cultural explosion. Cabarets, theatrical performances, and an atmosphere of permissiveness challenged the traditional norms of the past. It was an era where sexuality, gender, and identity began to be explored openly, creating a seductive and provocative underworld that fascinated artists like Dix. In his famous triptych Metropolis, Otto Dix depicted this contrast in Berlin life during the 1920s. On the left and right panels of the triptych, we see war veterans and sex workers, while the center panel reveals the glamorous life of the cabarets. It is a ruthless portrait of a city that combined luxury and decadence in equal measure. By that time, Berlin was a vibrant city filled with extravagant and modern characters. Among them, Otto Dix found inspiration for one of his most iconic portraits, the journalist Sylvia von Harden, painted in 1926. Dix saw in Sylvia an embodiment of an entire era, that of the Neue Frau or New Woman. With her short hair, flat chest, long expressive hands, monocle, distant expression, and slipping stockings, Sylvia broke away from the traditional idea of a discreet and virtuous woman. For Dix, she not only defied beauty standards, but also challenged the roles imposed on women. Historically, women had been portrayed through the male gaze, but Dix approached female beauty in a different way. Instead of idealizing her, he painted Sylvia as she was, without concern for making her appealing to the viewer. For Otto Dix, portraying Sylvia von Harden was not just about capturing an individual, but an entire generation of women who were claiming their independence and questioning societal norms. This is why it remains one of his most recognized works, for its profound social impact. As mentioned throughout this video, World War I deeply impacted this artist, becoming a traumatic experience that permeated his entire body of work. In 1932, Dix completed The War, one of his most renowned works, composed of 4 panels that capture the devastation of the First World War. This triptych depicts soldiers facing death and decay in a landscape of ruins and corpses. The painting portrays the brutality and madness of war with shocking realism, exposing the rawness of the conflict. Dismembered bodies, death looming over the battlefields, and, of course, the victims who had to be buried amidst the chaos. However, in 1933, the rise of the Nazi regime marked a dark turning point in Dix's life. Like many other artists, the Nazis declared his art degenerate and expelled him from his position as a professor at the Dresden Academy. Dix was included in the infamous 1937 Degenerate Art Exhibition, where works like The Trench were displayed to be mocked and later confiscated. The Nazis could not tolerate paintings that might lead people to question the glories of war. In total, 280 of his works were removed from German museums in 1938. Otto Dix became a victim of the Nazi repression against modern art, but his legacy endured. Even in paintings like The 7 Deadly Sins, Dix mocked the regime with a subtle detail in this artwork. Let me know in the comments if you can spot the hidden satire. Thank you for watching this video until the end. If you found it interesting, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to see 2 videos like this every week. Finally, I'd like to remind you that on our website, you'll find a collection dedicated to Otto Dix, where you can collect his best paintings. You can also explore our catalogue, which features over 500 selected works that you can have in your home. Shipping is free worldwide, and by making a purchase, you'll be supporting me in creating more videos like this one. Thank you for your support, and see you in the next video.